Fantastic. I think everyone has joined. And I will just sort of start off with a little bit about why we are doing this and some context, and then we can move forward. First, we'd love to take questions, and we'll try to bring it using the Q&A button. So please ask whatever questions you want using the Q&A button, and then we can go from there. I will first, of course, start to share the screen. And what we're going to do is I'm actually going to share the policy, and we're going to go through highlighted elements one by one. And the reason why I wanted to do this with all of you is because there has been some coverage in the media. Obviously, there have been various drafts, but there's a lot of context that has happened between each drafts. And I think going through it very carefully, and I think over the next 60 minutes, we will pick only the highlights. Now, there's a lot in this policy that is there. So I'm going to skip even some of the more interesting bits because they have been well covered by other reporting and people. And so then let's get right into it. So of course, the first thing that comes up, and if you can't see the highlighted text, just give it a second. Sometimes as I highlight, it takes a while to hit your screens. But I think the first one thing that was covered is essentially this new breakdown. What we used to always say 10 plus 2 in the school education space has now gone to the 3 plus 2 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. Now, the interesting part isn't as much here as the focus on the policy is down here. And essentially what they have done is that they have put in an extra year of early childhood education and care. And as we go through, that will show up again and again. And I think this is an interesting part when, as they restructure how school education looks like, we don't think much will actually change in the K-12 context. But what is very important is the entry-level requirements to a K-12 education. So normally we have a nursery and KG. That pre-nursery element is now being focused on. And this shows up very clearly in this point where they will set up, and I love this acronym, NCPFECCE. And this is going to be a completely new framework. And historically, NCRT and our education institutions really kicked in once age 4 onwards as well. But now they're saying, look, we want a sub-framework from 0 to 3. And although they haven't mentioned pre-nursery and early childhood care centers for private organizations as well, obviously this is something that will slowly trickle down there. The policy does envision a universal ECCE, and at least from the government part, they have tried to say that, look, this will be done all across. So either a standalone place, the Anganwadis, as they have named it, or located within existing primary schools, or pre-primary school sections covering 5 to 6 in K-12 areas, and of course standalone preschools. And the very interesting part, of course, is this entire notion of workers and teachers specifically trained in the curriculum and pedagogy of ECCE. Interestingly enough, they are looking at activity filled tours, and very much the policy envisions a transition to go from an Anganwadi school to a primary school. And so the idea is to give them a little bit of exposure. I think very well thought through. And I think it's also going to change the face of how schools look at nursery admissions, wherein if you have pre-nursery schools and classes really connecting, those will come up as well. The interesting part of the ECEE is this intervention called the preparatory class, the Balavatika. And I think this is going to be a shorter play-based learning to move students who have missed out right now. And so I like the fact that they've had that transition phase. But I think the key highlight here, which we need to look at, is that workers and teachers who work in ECE can actually directly go after 10 plus 2 qualification. So there is no need for a 3-year or a 4-year bachelor's degree in or a BEd to do this. They will do a 6-month certification program. And those who in fact don't have a 10+2, just 10 maybe, yeah, obviously that has changed the nomenclature, but can easily do a 1-year diploma program. Now, this I think is a very realistic sort of policy for the entire country. One of the things that we all have to consider, this is an India-wide policy. So it has to be applicable to urban, super urban, rural, semi-rural, has to go into tribal. And so a lot of times we look at policy from the lens of an urban middle class. But to launch such a huge ECCUE program all across the country and then have a very high bar for who can give the program would not have been practical. And many of us would argue that perhaps a 6-month certificate or a 1-year is not enough. And I think even the people who set the policy would agree it's not enough. But I think this is a reasonable compromise to at least get those conversations started and at least get some amount of early childhood education into the system. I'm going to skip a lot of this, a few things there. We're looking at by 2025, and so the policy seems to look at 2 dates, 2025 and 2030, and we'll see a lot of what they have done and is try to say that here are our aims for 2025 and here are our aims for 2030. If you saw the previous policy, the 350-page one, or some of the drafts that came out last year, they were a lot more aggressive in trying to implement. And although for many people, 2030 might seem very far away, that's 10 years. And the kind of transformation that they're asking in the education system is, I think, it's a sufficiently aggressive timing. Now, one of the big things first, which they have put, and this has gone all across the text, is this focus on teacher vacancies. And you'll see that again in a minute when we look at the school complexes. But what's very nice is to see that they are looking at a pupil teacher ratio of almost 30:1. And even if as you go to social disadvantaged students, will aim for a PTR of 25:1. Now, this is a remarkably small number, which means there's going to be a massive, massive number of new teachers that will be required. Obviously, they mentioned the familiarity with local languages. You know, we've seen that again in their focus on local, and which we'll come to that. The before grade 1, and we saw that was a school preparatory module. That's a 3-month based play. Now, again, NCERT will be sort of setting what that 3-month play-based school preparatory module look like. And I think this is again very interesting and realistic amount of time that they've put in. And it's also an opportunity for schools to reach out to students much earlier while they're looking at admissions, both for private schools and public schools. Diksha is playing a huge role in the new policy, and you'll see Diksha come up again and again and again as sort of a central repository for all course material, cases, knowledge, everything else. And this would sort of, I believe, also combine a lot of the other state initiatives, although the policy doesn't expressly say it, but there is a focus that, look, we need to have one single point and one single national repository of all of these cases, resources, videos, guides, and all. And I think that is a good step forward as long as we can figure out some way of differentiating quality. And I think that will be one of the biggest challenges that Diksha will face. This is a very interesting thing for the health sector as well. All school children shall undergo regular health checkups, especially for 100% immunizations in schools, and health cards will be issued to monitor the same. This is a dramatic push for public health. It is absolutely required. Very glad the government is doing it, and this will create a huge opportunity for those in the health sectors severely impacted by COVID-19 to really start engaging with schools. A lot of programs had started, but now it's an outright policy. This is an interesting part, and I think one of the policies that they have clearly looked at is how do you deal with dropouts. And they have seen that both in terms of when we are looking at how dropouts are happening at the school level, as well at the college level, And again throughout, they have really tried to emphasize that how do we continue on students. There are lots of interventions here. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but that is a huge focus of this policy. Again, back to the local language, and I'll spend a few seconds on local languages because that's been discussed, till the cows come home as the big thing. It was also the thing they picked up on the last policy in the media. But essentially, the issue what they're trying to tackle is that in study after study, what they've seen is that students, and particularly in the government education system, drop out because they are unable to keep up with both the content of the curriculum and the language which is taught in it, right? So they're going home, they're speaking their local language in their state or in their community, and suddenly they come to school, and many of them might come late or they haven't gone through an early childhood education. And on one hand, they're struggling with learning English or whatever is the main language of instruction in that school, and then they're struggling to learn the content. And that is what they are really trying to bridge here, is to ensure that students get both a leg up on learning the content through their local language, but also eventually start learning languages that are nationally important, such as English. This is a very interesting thing. Now, NIOS has been a fantastic a program for students all across the country. It has really picked up the slack where you have dropouts and school systems has failed. And they are now increasing the number of programs. And that includes the ability to get an ABC level at 3/5 of the school system, that equivalent to grade 10 and 12. Now, this is very, very important because one of the things that, and it's a policy fixture throughout that they're trying to do, is to ensure that every single part of the program is well done and documented. So tomorrow, if you go to you've passed out of class 5 and that's the highest education you've got, 10 years later, if you want to start continuing back through an adult education, which they have way at the bottom of the policy, that immediate link is there. I think it's a great step forward is the documentation of learning. And that is another big thrust of this policy. And we'll see that again in higher education. One of the beautiful parts of this policy, it's practical. It acknowledges the realities that we are facing, and everywhere else it's trying to give equivalence to both government and non-government organizations. And I think this is a fantastic turn, and we'll see that have a massive impact later in the system. But one of the key focus is that sitting in Delhi, you can't be so arrogant to say, I sitting in Delhi will dictate the education needs all across the country down to every single village, every single tribal, every single society. And that is what was the RTE Act earlier, which was, in my opinion, one of the most terrible acts ever envisioned. Highly unpractical, destroyed the education ecosystem in many, many ways, even though it was well-intentioned. And I think a lot of this policy does is correct those wrongs. Is to really say that, look, we need schools that reflect the needs of local areas. We can't just have a standard school template, which we throw all across the country and then shut down everywhere else. I think this will allow a huge number of new schools to come out, which offer a very differentiated time of education. And the policy does have a manner, and we'll come to that later, of transitioning students from very interesting different pedagogical activities back into the mainstream, because that was another problem that we were facing. We're going to try to skip this. Big one here. This has been covered widely. They are going to reduce the curriculum content to its core essentials. Multiple HRD ministers have spoken about this. Multiple state level ministers have spoken about this. But the key for education administrators, the very key thing here is that it's dramatically increasing the work required from teachers. And that's going to show up as well as we look at the B.Ed program. is that right now, most teachers, in 99% of the schools in India, were able to take a cookie cutter syllabus, cookie cutter book, and just lecture, teach, give a test, and they're done. Um, if the syllabus is cut down, there's going to be a massive gap that is created. And it's going to be school complexes, individual private schools, which are going to have to figure out how to fill that out. Now, a lot of schools are, very, very set to do that, particularly in the private sector, not so much in the public sector. And so one of the big things that the NCERT is going to grapple with is really how to fill that hole, and then how to train teachers up to the level where they now move from just delivering what they have been given to really thinking how they want to localize and work on individual issues of students. Experiential learning comes in, a lot of focus on art, culture, sports as well, all across, both in school education and higher education. Although there is a policy level, and this is something that we'll see all across, there is a vision and a broader thing, but a lot of the implementation has been left to the NCERT and other organizations. For example, integrating Indian art and culture in the teaching and learning process at every level is a big statement to make. It's a huge statement to make. And I think the real work is going to happen is how do we actually see this being implemented in the curriculum and the NCERT, CBSE, and state boards, how they take this up. Very happy to see sports come up as well. This is something that we'll see again, and I love what they've done to make sure that sports play an equivalent role, and it's not just, okay, you're doing sports because you're not serious about your academics. This one, I think, is a massive change. And this is something that you could do an entire webinar on, just talking about this few lines here. There will be no hard separation around curricular, extracurricular, co-curricular, arts, humanities, sciences between vocational academic streams, right? And I think this will completely destroy what India has got into, this idea of the arts, humanities, commerce, science streams. The PCM with computers, PCM with biologies, all of that is out. Every single subject will be given equivalent weightage. Now, obviously, the first step is to give the equivalent weightage in the syllabus and the systems, but we also have to train parents and all to think of it as equivalent weightages. I think this is something that will really, really make a huge, huge difference. There's also flexibility of teaching. And I love a lot of times that they've used a semester or any other system that allows the inclusion of shorter modules or courses or alternate days to allow more exposure and greater flexibility. And I think this is giving license to schools to say, look, you don't have to conform to a academic calendar that honestly was designed 300-400 years ago to help farmers. And then it went into the US, it went into the UK system, and then finally got imported into India. And it'll be very interesting to see how schools are able to play with this and what flexibility that we get from there. I know some of you are raising your hands, and I'm just going to pause sharing here just to check on our questions. We are going to see, okay, so we have a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to try to run through the policy very quickly, and I'm going to try to come back to these questions as well and see what we can do about it. Great. So I'll restart my screen share here. Now, here is what we reach, the most talked about one, whenever possible. And this is, if I could double highlight this, wherever possible, wherever possible. So this is not a dictate, it's wherever possible, the medium of instruction until at least grade 5, but preferably till grade 8 and beyond will be in the home language, mother tongue, local language, and regional dialect. This again comes from the fact that a lot of students fail out, have poor academic performance, is because they are learning either English or Hindi or the Majortarian language at the same time they're learning the content. Now, this will be closely tracked. We have to see how this is interpreted at the state level, but clearly, I think wherever possible does give a lot of flexibility. So I want to make sure that everybody gets this, that it's not suddenly all English medium schools will have to start figuring out what the local language is. I can very much doubt that will happen. There'll be public protests on this, but I do think at least for non-urban, rural schools which were struggling because they had a mandate to teach in a particular language, that they were struggling to find teachers, they were struggling for their students to catch up, will be at least able to give their students a leg up. Now, there is a disadvantage in terms of a globalized job market. There is a English speaking advantage that India has had, and I think there will be struggles in school on how to do it. The policy also does not answer the aspiration and desires of parents, because we've seen in many pilot studies all across the country, given the option between a decent and good English speaking in private school and a very good local language government school, parents will still pay a little bit extra and want to send to the English medium school. But again, I want to emphasize, this is a policy for all India, all India, right? And so I think at every local district, at every local thing, flexibility has been given for them to decide what that language and what they need to do there. If the one big thing people are looking at, there's going to be a massive need for language teachers. They have basically put in that with the new 3-language formula that they're saying everybody will learn 3 languages. There's going to be a massive need for language teachers, to the point they have said that states from different regions of India should enter into bilateral agreements to hire teachers from each other to satisfy the 3-language formula in their state. Many of these schools are basically done local language plus English. They need a 3rd language, and this is something that's going to really drive hiring and language education all across the country. So I'm not sure why the policy goes into so specific details. Or a lot of time it goes very broad brush, and then it zooms in, saying that there will be every student in the country will participate in a fun project activity called the Languages of India, right? And sometime in grades 6 to 8, under the Ek Bharat Shrestha Bharat initiative. Now, I like the fact that the government is continuously seeing that how one part links to the other. Assuming you taught a local language, you are double downing on people being in that state and disconnecting from the global federal structure of India, which was connected by either a common national language, which ends up being English, or strong, large regional languages in north, south, east, west. And I think those are going to, I think this sort of zoom in and zoom out thing is going to play out very interestingly when this policy turns into law. And I'm going to talk about that very briefly towards the end, about how can they actually turn this into the various laws that are required. This is a big one. Sanskrit is being made mandatory at all level of schools. And I don't know how well this or does not connect into the 3 language formula, or even consider Sanskrit. That has not been clarified yet. But there's also this notion of simple standard Sanskrit and Sanskrit to Sanskrit. Now, part of this here, I think, has been inspired by the simple standardized Chinese model, where they eliminated all dialects of Chinese all across China, and they said there is one Chinese Mandarin, and simplified text, and that has to be taught in all schools, and everybody must learn it. But it's a very interesting that they are going to try to standardize Sanskrit throughout. It opens up a huge number of avenues for schools as well as service providers, because if you can't find the number of Sanskrit teachers you need. I mean, can you imagine the number of Sanskrit teachers that would suddenly be needed to get this up and running? Now, the problem is that if Sanskrit is mandatory as an option, and so this is going to be a practical issue. So if you have to offer Sanskrit as an option, you have a local language, you have Sanskrit, you have most probably English as a 3-language formula. It's going to be hard to offer more languages beyond private schools. I think a lot of government schools are going to struggle with this. And I think this is going to be the new default. Your local language, English, and Sanskrit. This is a shout out, I think, between for what happened as a controversy when they put an emphasis on Hindi. They've brought that out, they've cut all of that in, and I'll be looking at all sorts of language. They have looked at foreign languages. Again, part of the problem is they are using things like will also be offered. And that confuses in the sense that is it mandatory, is it non-mandatory? And I think this will be stuff like this will be just left in policy. I rarely doubt that this is something that's going to be governed into law. This is a very important thing. Indian Sign Language will be standardized across the country. This is extremely, extremely important. It's something that has been pending for decades, and they've finally done this. Although I wish we had a global sign language, but the world is already split between international sign language and American sign language, and it would have been nice to see some text around the integration of ISL, the Indian Sign Language, with the international standards as well. I presume they're going to do that. That would be the right thing to do. But at least now we have the Indian Sign Language standardized. The policy throws out a lot of buzzwords: artificial intelligence, design thinking, holistic, health, organic living, environment education, global citizenship education, etc., 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 all relevant stages. This is an interesting point. I am not sure what the etc. means, quite frankly. And I think here they were doing more to be comprehensive. But the focus is that we do want to modernize. So I think that's the key focus there. I wouldn't hold much stock into the exact wordings that I used. In my opinion, they should not have used such specific wordings, because it is very much the buzzword of 2020, and this is supposed to last us for at least a couple of decades. But at least they are signifying that, look, we want modern subjects in school levels as well. Again, very pilot programs built into the policy. All students will participate in a 10-day bagless period where they will intern with vocational experts such as carpenter, gardeners, potters, artists. Now they could have they could have done this without seeing the bagless period, but I thought it was an interesting fact that they put that in. But it's also and we'll see that at the bottom where there's an entire section devoted to it. And I think this is very, very well done. Is that bring in vocational experts, carpenters, gardeners, potters, artists, etc. I think this will allow not only enrichment for our students, but also when you have high dropout rates, particularly at class 6 level, class 8, class 10th level, they have exposure to some vocational education, so at least they understand that. And I think that will be extended, would really help skilling India up. A lot of stuff on this. This is important. They are going to have a new national curricular framework for school education. NCFSC will be undertaken by NCRT, and based on the principle of the national education. And then this will sort of go down all the way down to the government's ministries and all. And they will revise it every 5 to 10 years, taking into account frontline curriculum. This is huge. If you look at the entire text, CBSE is barely mentioned, and particularly before COVID-19, the Delhi government had already declared that Delhi will withdraw from CBSE and set up its own board. Now, if Delhi government schools withdraw from CBSE, apart from private schools and Kendra Vidyalayas, there are not many CBSE schools left. There's still quite a lot. It's still one of the biggest boards in India. But then it becomes a central board more than something associated with a large number of state schools there. And this throws all of that out. So we are going to have one national curricular framework for school education, and then this will go down to the boards. And this was very much needed. There was a huge problem connecting the dots between different state boards, and this is something that has been done very, very well. The creation of this, and this is something going to be very, very hard work, and this is where I see a lot of intervention in technology will actually be used. I think this is something which is a very big aspiration to do. And that is to give a holistic 360 report card to every single student in India. This is a huge, huge thing to do. It's a massive undertaking. It requires huge amount of technology, teacher training, assessments to be completely redone. It's very ambitious. It's an absolute aspiration. And I think this is going to be really, really something that we're going to see work, which is going to be very hard. I would imagine it would take at least 5 to 10 years. I mean, they'll issue the formats, but to actually get everybody in and doing it in a proper manner is going to take a very, very long time. And also, I think this is the first thing where we see is a complete change in the attitude on the examination systems. The big one, in effect, deletion of board exams in their current form. And essentially, 2-3 things that are there. One, the problem the policy is trying to look at. One is, of course, board exams are stressful, they're hard. We've all known that. Every single year, everybody has saying redo board exams, redo board exams. That's now 3 decades, 4 decades old. Finally addressed in a very nice way. The second problem of what has happened is that because there are so many different state boards, and although you have the National Council framework that is now coming up, the marks a student gets in one state board and the marks in another, it's a very, very difficult to understand. That's difficult for colleges, and which has been changed down below in the policy. And it's really, really difficult for those companies who are trying to hire. A 70%er in math in one board could be the topper, versus a 95%er in math could be just one of many. And so breaking board exams into a modular competency over time delivered by the schools, I think this is fantastic. The key things, what they're saying, allowed to take board exams on up to 2 occasions during any given school year, 1 main examination and 1 improvement if desired. So everybody gets a second chance. I love this. I wish they had given more options, and they have changed it. But who implements the board examination on a state level and how they do it, that has been again left to the NCRT and state boards and all to decide. But they don't stop here. After the best of 2 attempts, they are looking at modular board exams. And this is more of a direction to state boards and NCRT and CBSE, that where you take the exam as soon as you finish the syllabus, right? And annual, semester, and modular. Theoretically, this means that you could take a board exam every 30 days. And the idea is you teach the course in class, everybody learns it, you give the exam, check mark, done, move on. And there is a certain elegance in this. Rather than trying to complete a full year's syllabus and testing the entire year syllabus in one high stakes exam, you say, learn, show that you've learned, and let's move on. And I think this will dramatically change what's happening in education, and for a lot of other ancillary people who connect, huge opportunities, whether it's for coaching centers or online digital providers, because you've now gone from one exam to many different exams. So I do see a huge change, and COVID-19 pushed the reset switch in all non-formal education services, and I think this is going to really change a lot. Everybody from your tuition classes, tuition centers, online is all going to be highly disrupted, and it's going to be very interesting to see how states interpret this and how much flexibility will be given to schools. Because if you allow exams, board exams every month, it's highly doubtful you can do this at a state level. It's going to have to be pushed down to the district level. And they've basically replaced these board exams with one big board exam, and we'll come to that. The new National Assessment Center is coming out. They mentioned it below, but this is the goal. NCFEC in 2021, next year, and the new assessment system will be implemented in 2022. So this is not a 5-year thing. It's not a 10-year thing. It's going to happen now. And so COVID is going to finish in 2021, March, April. That academic session starts, and immediately next academic session, the transition. This is going to require a lot of hard work and a lot of things to be passed at the state level as well, but schools need to prepare themselves. This is a full realignment. There's a National Assessment Center, Performance Assessment Review for Holistic Development as a standard setting body. The policy comes out with a lot of new things, right? But not just systems and processes, but a lot of acronym organizations. And this is one of the interesting parts, is that they're going to have a National Assessment Center, which sort of comes up with the norms, standards, and guidelines for student assessment and evaluation for all recognized boards. This is important again, because remember, big criticism, every board was doing whatever they wanted all across the country, very difficult to measure learning across different ideas, this. And here they said, look, we're not going to interfere in boards, but what we are going to say is that you need to align all your assessments together. And a lot of states are going to be very upset about this because they have their own ideas on how education should be, for better or for worse. But I think this alignment will be very good for students, particularly who are looking for higher education. And that hopefully, done right, would bring the level of all boards to a certain national minimum standards. National Testing Agency. This is the new board exam. Essentially what they have said, look, and by the way, to give you context, most countries don't have board exams. They just don't. Every school does its examinations and that's it. This entire concept of standardized board examinations is a very Asian system, and it's a very Indian system. Most of them have a higher education entrance exam system, whether China, Japan, Tokyo, etc. Or if you see more flexible education places such as the US and Europe, and the NTA sort of comes in on that. And this one is going to, again, dramatically change the face of education in India. IIT, FITG, entrance test, design test, all of these, everything is out. All of it is thrown out. It's a complete reset of the full entrance examination. This is one of those mega changes that will take place. And they will create and help universities align multidisciplinary all across and given at least twice every year. And so the idea is that you can take these multiple times. This is moving towards the GMAT SAT. Now, the thought is well done. The issue is, of course, how are they going to implement it, correct it, and all. Internally, I think they are looking at repeatable aptitude tests, just like more like a GMAT SAT than a single paper, because worries about how it will get leaked, who will do the checking, all of that's happening. So I suspect this will move to a standardized multiple choice exam, which is more of a very simple aptitude test, which can be repeated again and again and again. I think this will be a massive change, which, if implemented right, will fix a lot of the wrongs that our education system has been putting on students. Olympiads are taking. What's very interesting is that they are going to encourage IITs and ITs and all universities to use Olympiads and other factors in their testing. So not only are they saying we have this common entrance exam, but they're hinting for higher education that we are going to open up what the admission criteria to be a lot more flexible. And this is how it should be. Different colleges should have different criteria based on what they are trying to do. And having one standardized system rather than all these entrance exams brings down issues for the students. But having alternative entries as well is great for higher education. Many universities may want to say that, look, we want to pay maybe a 30–40% on this test, maybe 10–20% on Olympiads or marks for that, maybe essays, maybe interviews. And those, I think, are very important. I'm going to speed up because I'm running a little bit behind. But one very interesting part is that rural teacher shortage is a big issue. And they've taken this, multiple suggestions were given. This is something we also told them about, that they're going to have merit scholarships linked to local employment. And this is something that other countries have done for doctors, have done for teachers, that will give you scholarships assuming you stay and teach in those local areas rather than move to an urban center. This is code, by the way. One of the biggest corruption things happening in India are teacher transfers. Most education ministers, they hate this. They're ripping their hair out because all they do is transfer teachers all across. Huge money-making racket, huge problems of stability, and this completely clamps down on this. And I think this is, it's phrased differently, but I think this is going to be a very interesting to see how for government schools, this is going to have. There are going to be new teacher eligibility tests. This is going to be coming up. And they're going to ask private schools to go through the test. And also demonstrate interview and local languages. Again, this is coming up again and again and again. And back to the earlier point we had made, and seen that local language instruction will play a stronger role, but the language used in the policy has left it a little bit open-ended. This is a new one. Hire local eminent personal experts as master instructors, as cards, after vocational entrepreneurship. They've given this flexibility and they've asked public schools to do it. Most private schools do this already. This is a great thing for public schools. This is a huge change. And a technology-based comprehensive teacher requirement planning forecasting exercise. Now, I usually don't like this sort of planning commission type of thing, but this is something that has been really plaguing India. We do have an immense number of schools which have no teachers at all, huge amount of vacancies, and a lot of times there is no data around how many new schools are needed, how many teachers are required, how many vacancies are there, bringing it all in to one thing. Some states do it very well, by the way, some states do it very poorly. But getting that pipeline understanding will send a strong message to those who want to enter the teaching profession. I will send a strong message as well to the higher education community on really deploying the resources needed. We're looking at a decent, pleasant service condition at schools. Now, this point earlier in the policy went on for a long time, basically showing about all the ills, that teachers have to suffer, particularly in government schools in rural areas. And this, I think, is very nice. In-service training on health, safety, environment. This is something, again, COVID-19 has probably come in. This is a big change. The earlier draft didn't have the word may, and it was a pushing down for creating the school complexes, right? And essentially what they're saying is that a lot of communities, particularly in a 5 to 10 kilometer area, in schools up to 15 kilometers, have some schools which are fully subscribed, some schools which are what they call zero schools. There are thousands and thousands of zero schools, which means full teachers available, zero students there, right? And that's for legacy issues of politics, demographics, and movement. And the idea is that rather than hire a teacher into a single school, they hire into a government school complex. So 4, 5, 6 different schools, maybe even more, becomes into a school complex. Teachers move across schools. They're all very close to each other, but also they're able to share staff, training, social workers, technical maintenance staff. And so rather than a school of maybe 1,000, 2,000 students, you now have a block complex of something like 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 schools which share resources. Huge opportunity for the private sector as well, because now you're selling to blocks. You aren't going individual school by individual school. Very interesting opportunities in digital education as well. Very interesting opportunities is of providing services there, because if you're now getting instead of fighting school to school contracts or board to board contracts or district to district, you now have a school complex that are there. Unfortunately, this idea has been moved to the May section. There was a huge issue that was there, but has also been deleted in this policy. Earlier, they had parents as part of the school complex administration board. That entire section has been deleted. I think the local administrators were very scared about that. Teachers will be given more autonomy in choosing aspects of pedagogy. Very important, especially since you're deleting a whole bunch of the curriculum. This is something which we've been demanding for years, and it has come in. Every teacher has to have 50 hours of CPD per year, driven by their own interests. It's been kept very flexible. The higher education side, they've looked at online, offline certification. Again, school principals, complex leaders, etc. Also 50 hours of CPD. Most good schools do this, but now it's enshrined. Listen, career management progression. A lot of what they're trying to reform is how teachers are hired, how they are promoted. There's very, very interesting things. The career growth is no longer, and this is something which hasn't been covered very well, is no longer your PGT, TGT, and so on. So there is no incentive, career incentive to move from being teachers in early stage to vice versa, right? So you had this hierarchy that you first become a pre-primary teacher, then a primary teacher, then a middle school teacher, then a senior, and that's sort of how your career growth would get path. They're deleting that. It's a massive reform. That's saying, no, you can actually grow by picking an age group that you really love and you really think you're good at, and moving up because of your expertise, because of your delivery within that, and becoming an administrator. And that equivalence is a massive, massive change. And I think this is something which has not been covered as well. I think it's incredible. There are a lot of teachers who are very, very good and very, very passionate about a certain age group, and to force them to choose between their careers and sticking to specializing in that age group, I think is a massive, massive issue that needed to be solved. And I think it has been solved very well by doing this. By the way, I'm seeing people raise hands. Please don't raise hands. Ask questions during the Q&A. I don't think we'll have time to, unmute people to get it. But please, let's put this in there. Standard setting for teachers. Again, new standards of professional standard setting body, PSSB under the GC. Again, General Education Council, new thing that's coming up. We'll see it in the bottom, has come up. Now, the professional standard setting body is going to really take over the current NCTE and the current teacher standards. This is very, now, earlier, they were destroying a lot of organizations. Here, they've kept their names there, but they've clearly said that we are moving to a professional standards. They're also going to put standards. So this has bite. It's not just, hey, you should do this, but what your performance appraisal will be for each stage. And promotion and salary increases will not occur based on tenure or seniority, but based on this appraisal. Massive change to teacher reform all across the country. This is going to change how teachers view their careers. And it's also going to professionalize how teachers are hired, how they are promoted, what aspects of them are rewarded. I can see a lot of teachers will leave the profession because they can't stand up to these standards, and that's a good thing. But it's also going to encourage a lot of people now to see teachers, being a teacher, as a serious profession and calling, and not that, oh, I have nothing better to do, chalo, let's become a teacher. By 2030 is not far. We'll have maybe 2.5 batches before this happens. 4-year B.Ed will be required for all teachers. And this is something which is very good. But they have, and this is very good, have allowed a 1-year B.Ed programs for multidisciplinary bachelor's degree. They have also allowed within the context that for very, very bright students, they will allow them a capstone B.Ed program. They haven't defined what a bright student is, but hopefully those things will come in. But they're also allowed to give B.Ed program in a blended or online model. I think this is something which is very, very interesting because they're trying to cover up the rural areas and thing. All B.Ed programs will include strong practicum training in the form of in-classroom teaching at local schools. Extremely important. It's something we've all been pushing for years, and this will absolutely push things. A lot to cover. Special short distance local education programs, shorter post B.Ed certification courses. This is to move from different aspects of teaching. Another new national curriculum framework for teacher education. Again, NCRT shows up here. NCRT pretty much has shown up everywhere on this entire thing. They're also looking at vocational education here. This I didn't highlight, but I thought I'd highlight it out here. The teacher education institute TEIs will be shut down. This is the earlier they had taken a very strong view. In fact, this is a diluted language they've used in the final draft. And essentially, the reports have come out that a large number of these are bus degree mills. That essentially people want government jobs. They go, they give them a bribe, they get their BEd degree, they get the government job. This has destroyed education all across the country. It has destroyed BEd programs across the country because BEd programs are forced to compete with people who will just take money and give the degree. And I think this is a very step in the right direction. But for those who are involved with TEIs, there is a framework in the higher education side of slowly moving out of being a standalone TEI. So they have given a path forward for those who are willing to take it. A lot of good stuff on disadvantaged groups. I am not going to focus on that right now. But this is something very interesting. Alternative form of schools will be encouraged to preserve traditions of on an alternative pedagogical style, and there will be support to integrate the subject and learning by NCFESE into their curricula to reduce and eventually eliminate the underrepresentation of children from these schools into higher education. This covers minority institutions, this covers special education, this covers earlier, this was specifically to address the massive problems being faced by community-run schools based on either a caste, a special needs, local religion requirements, where it was dead-ended. They couldn't, their syllabus wasn't linked to a higher education opportunity. That entire 10-page of that has been compressed into these few lines. I think so. This is a hugely important thing because it's completely changed the face of minority education in the country. They don't say it outright. They, in fact, don't even use the word minority there, but that's what they mean here. Again, school clusters. That's a big part. I'm not going to cover that since I have to run to higher education soon. A lot of stuff around accreditation. But here is the big change. The Department of School Education in the state level will no longer monitor or do any regulatory making for private schools. It's been completely eliminated. And the reason why this happened is because what they looked at in states, the most corrupt, the most money making, the most badly run departments in many states has been the Department of Education, where they have where people and there have been ministers, there have been local appointees and directors who've used these positions to extort private schools. That has been completely stopped. That horrible era where there was a wanton destruction of education in the country has been completely eliminated. This is fantastic. Department of School Education will only focus on government schools. And I think the policy gets it right. No student should go to a private school as a first choice. They should go to a private school because a private school is offering them something different. And I think that has been a little bit enshrined here. Instead, we are going to have a state school standard authority, SSA. One of the big things that a lot of Department of Education, there are different standards for government schools, different standards for private schools, and done so to make money. And this is out. We're now going to have a single state school standards authority, SSA, and these are safety, security, infrastructure, number of teachers, grade, financial probabilities, sound process of governance. This will be created by the SCRTs, which is the state level of the NCRTs, in consultation with teachers in school and applied evenly, right? Private schools will have to self-disclose, they'll have to put on their website, but they are not at the mercy of these DOEs and all who abuse their powers now for decades. Public-private schools shall be assessed and graded in the same criteria, benchmark processes, emphasizing online and offline public discourse. Some states, if you would not believe, have a list of every private school in their state. They don't even know the list of their own public schools. That has changed. And I think now this, the new policy makes it very clear, private philanthropic efforts of quality education is supposed to be encouraged as a national policy. All education institutions will be held to the same standards of audit and disclosure. This is very important because transparency is very, very important. The only way to take out bad players, both in the private sector and the public sector, is to make sure everything is put. This one line is key. Big line, which is a huge change for all funding in the education sector. Surpluses in FNE will be reinvested in the education sector, not in the same school, not in the same school complex, not in the same state, in the education sector. Different states, depending on how progressive or how regressive they are, I suspect will massively hit this point and will try to change it, because again, they want to be corrupt, they want to take money, and they want to pretend to be on the side of parents, but at the same time, all they're doing is destroying education across the country. This will allow schools to create new classes, new resources, and really up the game. By focusing on private schools, most states have completely taken their eye off government schools. And the focus of government should be to empower government schools so they are as good or better than private schools. RTE. This is the massive issue that RTE did. They had a one-size flexible checklist for everybody. That has been taken out. That you don't need these number of classes, these classrooms, such a big field, this. You can create a school depending on your local context, on your urban context or rural context. A lot of schools, a lot of very good schools, a lot of non-profit foundations, a lot of government schools had to be shut down because RTE forced them to a one-size-fits-all. That has been removed. Like this is going to be a huge moment for so many philanthropic organizations which were running small, high impact schools in local areas to come back. And again, this will again go back to the states. And I think progressive states will understand the need for it. Regressive states who want command control and more control on the education are going to have an issue with this. There's a new National Achievement Survey. This is good data. And this is important. A lot of states fake their data. A lot of them give media lectures on how well their students have done, and they massage the numbers. This will be eliminated, and we'll have transparency all across the sector. So I'm going to pause and end on school education right now. I'm going to take a couple of quick questions, then I'm going to quickly run to higher education and try to cover that in the next half an hour, because surprisingly, it's actually easier for higher education, given that a lot of the reforms are already come in. One question, NEP offered different entry and exit option. Is it applicable in the 6 to 8 bracket? Absolutely. If you read the policy, they are creating multiple brackets for exits and particularly tied to a national credentialing. Does it mean a student who has scored 80 marks and is not happy can give the board exam again? One, I don't think you are going to have a marks-based examination. I think there's going to be a more graded system, and CBSE and NCERT have been moving to there. But yes, they can give the board exam again. And not only that, it depends on which state board, because they have to change their systems. Not only can they give the board exam again, but quite frankly, board exams might be eliminated completely. And that every month you give a unit board exam, and that adds up to your final score at the end of the year, which is fantastic. Transition time, according to me, I think they're going to run like mad to try to push this out in the next 1 or 2 years, particularly with the elections coming up. This will be a signature thing that's there. They're going to run into a huge problem with state governments. And at the very end, I'm going to talk about implementation. Will be difficult for education providers, particular school system, to handle this. It will be horrible. I'm telling you, we are not ready for this policy. We are just not ready. That doesn't mean it's not required. And I think we really need to all get together as an education community. And one of the reasons why I went to this line reading is that people don't realize the dramatic change has happened. You will, somebody who's educated in 2023 will not be able to recognize the system that their parents, grandparents, or even their elder brother or sister went through. It will be a completely different system. And the devil is going to be in the details. Is there going to be a focus on liberal arts education? Absolutely. They haven't used the word. Quite frankly, I wish they had, and we've been pushing for them to use it. But essentially, they are going to do, universities like Apeejay University, which have core subjects, liberal arts, all of this. This policy has basically said everybody needs to do what Apeejay University is doing. Everybody needs to have a liberal arts approach. Everybody needs to have multiple disciplinary. Everybody needs to have multiple degree programs. Everybody needs to have a holistic thing. And we want to come to higher education there. How will teachers be trained in a time-bound manner, especially in disadvantaged areas with high people to ratios, high rates of literacy? It's going to be tough. There's going to have to be a massive national teacher retraining program. We are going to have to hire, and COVID-19, a lot of teachers have lost their jobs all across the country. Hundreds of thousands of teachers lost their jobs. And I think once the new education policy is going to be implemented, all of them are going to be brought back. And in fact, this thing is going to create 25:1, 30:1 ratios. That you're asking for tripling the number of teachers currently in India. I'm going to quickly go to higher education, lots of other questions at the school level. But again, the key emphasis which I want to take you to this is a whole scale change. It's not, okay, we've done a little bit board exams here or some language training here. Fundamentally restructuring of education all across. And huge new opportunities for all people looking at the sectors. It is a reset switch. Every player who was here for the last 30, 40 years in any space is going to completely be reset. So new startups, new ecosystems, new people coming in. And for old ones, they need to pivot immediately. This is not a 2050 or a 2040 document. It's a 2030 document with most changes coming next year and a one-year change. And there's history for this. You had the new NEET exam, for example, which came in. You had a modified version of the IIT system. So they've done this before. And all of us need to get aligned very quickly. Higher education, very, very important. They did a very good job documenting higher education problems. I mean, it's something we've all been saying for years and years and years. And you know what? Most of the stuff they've taken for higher education, particularly, is from the UGC policies in all in 1965. 1960s were the high mark of education policy setting in India. 70s happened, 80s and 90s were the dark ages, horrible policy setting, terrible ideas thing. And 2000 perhaps was the age of corruption, where they used the policies of the 80s and 90s to truly expand this sector into all sorts of practices and completely muddied the waters. And this policy is long due. I'm really happy it's here. A lot of people are not going to be happy with it because it's fundamentally changing so much that is going to happen. But those who have been progressive in the last 10 years have already adopted, I think, 80–90% of these policies. So first, one, now earlier in this policy, if you'd seen the larger policies, right, in the 350-page document, they actually said any institution with less than 5,000 to 8,000 students will be shut down. Obviously, they couldn't do that. They have now pushed this out, that there's only going to be large multidisciplinary universities and college, at least one in near or every district, and with more HEIs across India that offer medium of instruction. Again, local Indian languages plays an important role here. Lot of talk, lot of fight and controversies on whether higher education should have at least been linked to global standards because English gives access to everything. But also it disadvantages students who aren't native English speakers, who didn't grow up in a household that speaks English. And if you're going to have schools which are doing local languages, it makes sense to have higher education that are doing local languages. So interesting to see how this will play out. We're going to talk about NRF. And that was a very interesting change that they made. Again, instead of closing down all things, they are now moving towards large multidisciplinary universities and clusters of knowledge hubs, each would have at least 3,000 students or more. And the idea is that we're going to break down silos. It's going to be really difficult for a lot of traditional educators to change, but it's here. Just like everyone had to learn how to conduct a Zoom call or webinar under COVID, now the NEP is going to be a dramatic change. No more single department vision. Everybody is now multidisciplinary. And using these hubs, they're going to connect it all together. They have formally and properly defined universities and colleges for the first time. This is absolutely incredible. There were, like my last count, 11 different university types. There were at least 12 different college types, each with different powers, each with different governance structures, fees, this, that. It was so confusing. Forget about students, even administrators and education policymakers couldn't keep track. All of that has been collapsed, clean new definition of what a university is, and no discrimination between different types of universities. So you have a university, multidisciplinary, including research and teaching. So teaching and research university, which is very nice, and autonomous degree granting colleges, which are focused on primarily undergraduate, right? A lot of the words, by the way, used here are taken from US policy manuals. For example, I even noticed they use miles instead of kilometers in a couple of places when they were measuring distance. But the idea is that you have universities which do both undergraduate and graduate programs, so bachelor's, master's, PhD, and you have colleges which focus on bachelor's program, but it doesn't discriminate between the two. One is not better than the other. And I think that is a fabulous thing that they've done here. So the college can even grant masters. It's not just restricted, but it's considered to be a more smaller thing. A stage-wise mechanism from graded autonomy to college, so transparent graded system will be established. And we'll see that how it's happening, but essentially every college and university will become standalone. They don't need a third party to tell them how to teach. They don't need a third party affiliation. Dramatic differentiation. The earlier policy was much, much more strict. I miss that, in fact, because at least 30–40% of the colleges in India should be shut down as of tomorrow. The policy wanted to do that. They've taken a step back because they realized how disruptive it would be if, they said by 2025, every college which doesn't meet these parameters will get shut down. They've hinted at it, but earlier they were seeing it explicitly. And so a lot of the bad actors, a lot of people who are there just to convert land and, do black money laundering and all of that, hopefully will all be thrown out. People who have their mind stuck towards only single disciplinary programs, they will have to either evolve or will be thrown out as well. This is important. All essentially, you have basic autonomous granting colleges. They can evolve to research or teaching universities, but you can move between them. This is so important. This is so important because a lot of times you got stuck. You could only be one type of college. That's it. Now you want to become a university, too bad. A college can become a university can downgrade itself to a college, you can move left, you can move right. This is what is needed because it allows colleges and universities to react to what local needs that are there. This is phenomenally important, and this is a great evolution of education. Open distance learning, online programs, completely thing. In fact, just a couple of days ago, revised guidelines allowed the amount of blended learning to be jumped up to almost 40%. And COVID-19 has been a great teacher of that. Single stream will be phased out. So no more B.Ed colleges, no more MBA colleges, no more. This is the right way to do it. Everybody has to become either a multidisciplinary institution on its own or interact with a few different institutions in clusters to become a higher education cluster. And this is how it should be. If you look at the worldwide changes, Harvard is now setting up an engineering school. MIT is now setting up hopefully a liberal arts institution first. There's a clean understanding that you need to have a vibrant cluster or you need to have multi-departments. The single department, single thing does not work. And I'm very, very happy to see that it's going to be removed. Affiliation and affiliated college over 15 years will be scrapped. And universities will be asked to responsible for mentoring their colleges so each can become its own autonomous college. This is going to be a dramatic change for the better, but it's going to cause a lot of side effects. We will need to educate students how to apply to different colleges because right now they apply to university and then they apply to colleges. How you do, each college will have to start differentiating itself. I think for students, they'll have a lot more choice. I think a lot of colleges are going to struggle because suddenly they no longer have the chaya or the chata of an affiliating university, and they can just cut, copy, paste, outsource their examination. So the capability jump of colleges are going to be very high. I think 30–40% of colleges won't make it. That's good. I think the policy earlier said they want 30–40% of colleges in India to shut down, and they will do it. And I'm very happy that they will, because we need to have consolidation right now. There are just too many random colleges all across the country offering wide variety of programs that really aren't up to spec or grade and hiding behind affiliations as well. We are looking at, again, single definition. University, you're a university, you're a university. Doesn't matter public, private, and it talks about public, private, it's a university. Same rights, same laws, same thing, everything is the same. All of it applies to you, right? No more deemed to be university, affiliating university, affiliated technical university, unitary university, university, university. Full stop. And that's fantastic. Holistic education, liberal arts. This is the liberal arts approach, which we've been saying year and year and after, and we've done it at ASU, and we're trying to push it all across the country. In the long term, the approach of all undergraduate programs, including those in professional, technical, and vocational disciplines. This is now policy. It's no longer aspiration. I have gotten exhausted trying to do this in the last 10, 15 years, seeing it again and again and again, and I'm delighted to see now it is the law. Well, not the law, it's the policy. The law, we'll have to see what comes from it. Even in, so just in case you were all wondering, policy clarifies, even engineering institutions as IITs will move towards holistic multidisciplinary education with more arts and humanities. Students of arts and humanities will aim to learn more science, make an effort to incorporate more vocational subjects and soft skills. Years ago in 2011, when we first opened Apeejay University, I was doing a press conference and we talked about how engineering students would have to take at least the 11 core subjects and wide variety of fields. First thing a reporter asked me, why are you confusing future engineering students? I was shocked and I realized so much work had to be done in India. And now it is the policy of what we've been talking about for so many years, is that you need to have multidisciplinary universities. You cannot have technical institutes. It does not work anymore. And everyone around the world, and particularly those in the top 100, 200 ranked technical institutions, have all moved slowly towards multidisciplinary or are accelerating their move. India needs to do this. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, how will IITs manage their engineering institutions? Why are you making them less eminent? They're not even the top 100, 200 in the worldwide engineering rankings in terms of research. And also, let's take a step back. Let's do what is actually working and actually working all across the world well, not Einstein's theory of insanity, repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. We've seen the results, it's not good. Let's now figure out and focus on what really, really is going to make a difference. Flexibility in curriculum, engaging course options to students, plus a specialization in subjects or subjects, something we've been pushing for, already do it at our university, but so glad to see it here. This is interesting. Departments in languages, literature, music, philosophy, arts, dance, theater, everything will be in a university. Something we've been saying for year after year after year. Now it is policy. And credits will be given in all bachelor's programs, either if they're done from departments or on an online distant learning, if they're not offered in class at the HEI. Brilliant. This is mandatory for us in our university, and I'm so happy to see it's mandatory now for all across the country. And mostly I'm happy because I don't have to lose my voice explaining to parents and everybody else why it's so important. It's the policy now. No longer discussion on why an engineer needs to learn improv or music. It's a done deal. Big things, multiple exits. I love this. This is something which we've been pushing. 4-year and 3-year undergraduate degrees are both allowed, but you can exit after 1 year. You get a certificate. You get a diploma after 2 years and a bachelor's after 3 years, or a 4-year multidisciplinary bachelor's, but it's the preferred option. So it's very clearly said 4 years is the preferred option. It's the international standard. I believe in it. I think it's the right way to do it. But the academic bank of credit, this is a massive reform. This is beautiful. And this is a huge opportunity for the private sector, for universities, for colleges, for third-party operators, for publishers, for online learning, digital learning, everything, right? So once you gain credits from accredited institutions, these move with you. This is so important, the multi-credit system. This is fantastic. Master's program, again, there either be a 2-year program with a research year for 3 years, or a 4-year plus 1 year for a master's program. This is an interesting thing. I'm ambivalent on this because, you know, I could argue with you, why shouldn't a master program be 1 year, 3 months, or 1 year, 2 months, and 1 year, 5 months? Why 2 years, why 1 year? So, I mean, it's fine. But it's interesting to see that if you do a 3-year bachelor's course, you have to do a 2 years master program, to do a 4 years bachelor course. So it's somewhere they're trying to align at the top level how many years and how each things connect. The MPhil program will be discontinued. which is a huge, huge jump. I don't think most people read that one little line they've put there. That's a massive change to the higher education system. But a PhD will require a master's or a bachelor's, which is interesting. I would thought they do it the other way, that a PhD doesn't require it, but well, fair enough. They will set up modern public. The MERUs will be the new ones. I don't know how they will put up the MERUs. I suspect they will transform existing higher education sectors and systems into these MERUs. I don't really see them now going around and setting up huge amount of universities from scratch again. It'll be stupid. They should just take the existing ones and transform them into the MERU. A lot of on learning environment. Again, no more high stakes examination, more towards continuous comprehensive evaluation, no more end year exams, this, that, etc. All that is out. We've been saying it for 30, 40 years. Finally, it's here. It's an academic curriculum and quality of classroom transactions and into the development program. This is very important. And I think this is again something that we've been saying. You have to have clubs, you have to have activities. All of those, instead of becoming student life, becomes part of mainstream curriculum. Good transitions. I'm going to ignore some of this because we're out of time here. Every institution has to have international students, and you're supposed to have an international students office at each AE to coordinate all matters relating to welcoming, supporting students arriving from abroad. Huge focus on international education. Top 100 or so, again, question will be operated here. Here, this is going to be very interesting. They had 10 years ago when they took up the draft regulations for foreign universities, I actually took it to some of the top 100 universities in the world, actually top 20, and asked, based on this act, would you come to India? And the answer was no. And so I hope they've learned from that. And so let's wait for the actual details, because the kind of, particularly after COVID-19, the kind of rules and restrictions they had put around financing, around funding, around this and that, had basically told most universities that, we are not going to be interested in this anymore. And so let's see how this actually works. We are going to look at seeing how that academic bank also connects to foreign universities. Missing, by the way, is the International Academic Bank and accreditation, which got cut out of the policy. There's a lot of stuff which has not come in, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit of that. National Scholarship Portal to be expanded, which is very nice. It would be nice to see if we could also get a national loan portal up, but that was dropped. Faculty will be given freedom to design their own curricular pedagogical approaches with approved framework, including choosing the textbook, reading material selection assignments. I know it's going to give heart attacks to command and control people all across the world. I mean, how many fights we've seen at Delhi University because they changed one book? And I think this is what we've been saying. Very happy it is now in. HEs will clearly define their own faculty recruitment, and there will be a fast-track promotion for high-impact research and contribution. They do bring back tenure here, which is interesting, but they have to see how that works into HR laws. A lot of steps by government. I mean, this is all fine. This is interesting. For the first time, they're talking about opportunity costs. So it's not just help students mitigate fees and bring fees down, but the fact that most people don't go for higher education because they have to earn. And so how do you either earn and study, or you get stipends from the government for studying? I think that's very, very important. This is the TEE, 10,000 in number are not even attempting a serious education. They want to shut this down. By 2030, only educationally sound multi-disciplinary integrated teacher programs shall be in force. Huge reform. Remains to be seen how they bring this into law. All TEs shall be converted to multi-disciplinary by 2030, and they will have to offer the 4-year integrated program. Again, on B.Ed, I won't go into details, already gone. This is very, very important. All fresh PhD entrants, irrespective of discipline, will be required to take credit-based courses in teaching, education, pedagogy, writing related to their chosen PhD subject during the doctoral training period. On one hand, in school education, we were saying B.Ed, you need all this training to become a teacher. And in higher education, saying, oh, you got a PhD, congratulations, you are now qualified to be a teacher. Ridiculous. Just getting a PhD doesn't qualify to be a good teacher. It qualifies you in the subject. However, the only criticism for this was that, that although I think it's abroad, and I think everybody should train out to be a good teacher, people who have no interest in teaching might object that this is taking time away from research. I still think it's a good idea, especially if you're going to maintain the sanctity of what opportunities a PhD offers you. And hopefully that will create a more inclusive and a more evolved PhD student culture as well. So, I mean, we've done with higher education, a lot of reforms there. We are looking at vocational education as a big thing. 2025, hugely aggressive, shall have exposure to vocational education at all levels has to happen. National Committee of Integration of Vocal Education. Now, this is going to be a very interesting committee, which is going to dictate how are we going to oversee the integration of vocational education into mainstream. And this is a very important one. The continuous continuous recognition of prior learning. So if people stop for whatever reason, they have to get a job, their family is in trouble, their learning is measured and kept, so they can move on to the next standard when they want. Now, in the initial drafts, the National Research Foundation was going to subsume all organizations. That is very interesting. They're not doing it. So they're keeping NRF, but they're also keeping DST, DA, DBT, ICR, ICMAN. They're specifically named all of them, including the UGC. They will also exist to keep giving grants, but NRF is going to be another body. This is a big change. Earlier, they were saying only NRF, everybody else gone. A lot of protests, a lot of things, obviously, some political, some genuine, that, you know, you can't have all your research into a single organization. There needs to be diversity and things that are institutionalized, you can't remove them. Well, all of those are still being kept, but going ahead, NRF. What's very nice is it's going to be focused on universities and colleges where research is at a current and nascent stage through mentoring of such institutions. Not just let's give the same 20 names money every year, no matter what they do with it. No, let's look at creating capability and capacity in India. Very well thought out. So glad they're doing it. It remains to be seen how much money is allocated, though, finally in the budget. Regulatory system, one standard new HICA, the HERA, 3-4 other names that come up in the last 4 or 5 drafts, is now called the Higher Education Commission of India. Earlier drafts had gone on for pages on how the existing framework would be put in. Many people didn't like that. I'll give you an example. The term AICTE is not even mentioned in the entire policy. UGC is mentioned one time. So obviously they're trying to make sure that they don't insult a particular agency. And anyway, the UGC and AICTE in the last 3 to 4 years have done a phenomenal job in coming towards this new education policy. So I don't see a very difficult transition for them. 4 verticals, the Higher Education Regulatory Council. This will be created by restructuring various regulatory bodies to enable a single point regulation. Light but tight facilitative manner on creating regulations. Regulatory is different from accreditations, which is great because we had accreditation body, including NAC already exists, for example, but its connection to regulations was tenuous at best and only loosely linked in the past couple of years. Now you have the MET accreditation body called the National Accreditation Council. And the idea was that they will attain the highest level of accreditation in 15 years' time. Everybody has to be A+. This is a big, bold step. It's supposed to help you get there, not come and say, oh, I'm going to do an inspection and you level. No, no, no. It is my job as the NAC to get you to A+. Then you'll have the Higher Education Grants Council, which is, I think, the UGC is probably going to see itself merge into this. This is funding and financing of higher education, including the IDPs and some definitions, disbursements of scholarship, development funds of new focus area and programs. Again, a lot of what the UGC does, but now narrowed down to a specific agency as well. And then the General Education Council, which showed up. And if you remember, that showed up at the very back on top as well. And this will do learning outcomes and really frame what degrees are, what they will come out with. This, by the way, was watered down even from the draft before the parliament passed it. And it was basically a lot of other councils and all were going to be disbanded and put into here. So they've just maintained this paragraph, but you can imagine this will now become the general standard setting for every degree and program. This is the key here. Identify specific skills that students must acquire during the academic program, but well-rounded learners, 21st century skills. We've been saying it now ad nauseum for 10, 15 years at least. Everybody has to have a core foundation course, and they have introduced that at the national. This is interesting. All the professional council, NCTE, ICR, COAs, CV, all will play a key role, will be invited to be members of the GEC. This was a compromise. Earlier, they were all being shut down. Now they will become uh, invited members. They would help specifying the curriculum framework, which within HE may prepare their own curriculum. This has watered down a lot of the corruption, a lot of the problems that many of these councils, I'm not talking about these specific councils, but a whole bunch of councils had come up, money-making schemes to accredited colleges, money-making schemes to give NOCs and all of this. That is being devolved down. You are now really, really looking at a evolved education system which is focused on outcomes and no longer extortion and all sorts of malpractices. Responsibility and accountability shall devolve to the institutions. No distinction in expectations made between public and private. There is massive admission here, very progressive thinking. This document has been passed by the Cabinet of India. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful way to say that we are no longer going to discriminate. The top universities in the world are all private universities, and India has done an extreme disservice to its population by this historic discrimination. All public and private shall be treated on par. No special distinction for any institution in the country. Just because you are a old institution or a new institution or a public or a private, you get some special treatment. Why? Because we are government funded. No, it's all the same regulatory regimes. There will be common national guidelines for all legislative acts that will form private HEs. The Commonwealth guidelines will enable all such acts to establish private HE, enabling common standards for both government and public. No distinction. This was absolutely required for India's ecosystem to truly thrive. This got even watered down and changed before and after the member. This was different 2 weeks ago. But essentially, earlier it was more open. Here they're going to a little bit progressive regime of fee determination. I'm worried. I preferred the existing draft where they said, look, do 20% free, 25% subsidized, and do whatever you want. This, let's see. The key word is this will empower HEs to set fees for their programs independently, though within the laid out norms and broad applicability of regulatory mechanisms. It's a punted it. Let's see what the law says. In 15 years, all HEs in India will become independent, self-governing institutions pursuing innovation and excellence. I mean, this should have started this as the bold thing on top. I think that's what we're really moving at. So a couple of minutes left. I'm going to run through the last bit. Very interesting 20.6 point on adult education. Technical education, including degree, diploma programs, engineering, technology. Man, this is, by the way, the definition taken from the AICTE Act for those who know. And I know that because catering technology always shows up. They are clear, erode silos between technical education and other disciplines. Technical education will be offered within multiple multidisciplinary education. Student program with renewed focus on opportunity to engage deeply with other disciplines. No more IIT, NIT focuses. Everybody has to become a fully functional university. A lot on adult education. A new curriculum framework for adult education with 5 types of programs. Very interesting. Again, NCERT plays a critical role here. I'm going to push down to the digital area. A lot of the stuff is very interesting. Please read. But then new National Education Technology Forum, NETF. Again, this has no regulatory ability or ideas, but it's an idea exchange. I wish they had given it more powers or more utilizations, but let's see where it goes. I mean, it's just an advisory body. So again, they should have done something more with this. I think this is a lost opportunity. All teaching, learning, e-content. Again, this is the Diksha platform. I had mentioned it earlier. This shows up a bunch of times. And you're going to see a huge amount of focus on pushing all content by NCERT, CIT, CBC, NIS, everything into this, including professional development program. Diksha and Swayam. Swayam for higher ed, Diksha for schools. A few things on digital. This is new. Looking at pilot studies for online education. Again, Swayam and Diksha will be the focus. I think everything is going to be molded into these two programs. Content creation, digital repositories, again, will be created. Virtual labs, again, Diksha, Swayam, this is very important. And I think there'll be an interesting see to if they have to have grants for individual private organizations as well as universities and colleges to create content around missing sections and put it up. They haven't mentioned it, will be very interesting. Teacher training and incentives for teachers, pushing teachers to become content creators. Online assessment and exams. Now, this is NTE is basically going to say 21st century skill. Now, post-COVID-19, this is a very, very important skills. Now, we've been running, we didn't stop. We had all our assessments running, but a lot of universities and colleges couldn't do it. Schools couldn't do it. I think this is going to be a big focus on just moving to online assessments, blended mode of learning, and such. Now, last bit, making it happen. We have a central advisory board of education, which will begin. So key organizations today, CABE, NCRT, these two are leading this. And Ministry of Human MHRD will be called Ministry of Education, which I think is fantastic. It sets the right tone for a complete revamp. The center and states will work together to increase the public spending education sector to achieve 6% of GDP at the earliest. It's in the policy. I don't know if they have the money to do this, but I'll give you an example. The total central government budget of higher education, total central government budget of higher education is almost equal to the total annual budget of Harvard University. One single university in the US is equal to the full central higher education budget of India. And that tells you why you need huge private philanthropic participation, because if the entire Indian budget for higher education is equivalent to one private university in the US, you know how much more spending has to happen. 6% is not enough. It'll be great if we can get it to that level, but we clearly need evolved models of education to push India to where we need it. There's just not enough money for the amount of transformation that's required. Very carefully here, linked to that 6%, rejuvenation, active promotion and support for private philanthropic activity in the education sector, particularly over above public budget support, which have otherwise been provided to them. Any institution can take initiatives towards raising private philanthropic funds to enhance education experiences. Clearly done, clearly given. Cabinet has passed the law. Commercialization has been addressed through light but tight regulatory processes and for good governance systems, and truly they have been. And I think the fact that they envision 30–40% of education institutions to close shows that they do know that the regulatory framework is strong enough to remove a whole bunch of bad actors. I'm going to stop there and we're going to look at some questions. But the big question which I'm going to address, which has come out to so many, and please use the Q&A button as well rather than anything else. First, how much will this get implemented? And the way, if you read it, there's always the may and the will. May and will, two words to look out for. Will, if they will get done and they'll have to change the policies. May is a recommendation. And a lot of the very game-changing ones are not may, they are will. Some of the more controversial ones are actually may. So on the whole, I think you're going to see a rapid implementation. The law reset is going to be a regulatory nightmare. I can already see the education, Ministry of Education now sweating with a huge number of IS officers, lawyers and all, having to redraft everything. There's at least 2 to 3 dozen acts they will have to scrap and completely redo. And I hope that they don't kill the intention of the policy in there. And I think that's the biggest risk, is that you had a beautiful policy that came out, and then certain individuals with their personal agendas who don't want to give up control will dilute those in the final acts. And we've seen that happen consistently. Beautiful state level education acts, and then diluted, saying, oh, to stop bad private actors, but actually to enable extortion. And those bad, and all the good actors left because they didn't want to do extortion, and more bad people came. So hopefully this implementation will happen. Is it going to be very difficult? Absolutely. Is it going to be a 2 to 3 year, 24 hours relearning for everybody in this country? It will. But my position on this, it's worth it. I don't think many people who've been commenting publicly on the policy have actually read it, have gone into depth, because as you can see, even 1.5 hours, we barely covered some of the very, very big reforms. Each out of the 2030 ones that I mentioned, each one of them is an implementation at scale for India, which will radically transform the experience in the classroom, which will radically transform how our ecosystems work, throwing up a lot of opportunities, but it's going to be a very difficult challenge. And so I highly encourage everybody to reread through it in detail. And then once the laws are passed, and I'm expecting hopefully by the end of the year, Prime Minister Modi himself has come on television multiple times praising the policy, talking about it, which is a first. Very rarely has our Prime Minister come out so much in support of a law and then nothing happened to it. So I think this is something that would be really, really something transformative. What is the implication of NEP on minority institutions? That's a great question. At this, basically, they are empowered. It's great. So, if it's no longer, how do I put this? Let's say you have a minority institution, right? And it's a college or a university or a school. It's a college or university or a school. There is no distinction between a minority and a non-minority institution anymore. All of them have the same powers, the same flexibilities, the same freedom, the same ability to do things the way they did it. Minority institutions will have to match national accreditation protocols, which seem to be very, very framework-based rather than prescriptive. And minority institutions can then, within those institutional development plans, talk about everything else that they want to do and focus on their minority mission. I think what has been done very clearly in this policy is a devolving of a centralized education system down to local levels, and in fact, encouraging more minority institutions to come up. And so I think there's going to be a dramatic increase in minority institutions as well, as their program really encourages them to come up and empowers them to be independent, but at the same time work in a national framework, which is important because you don't want them to be completely out of scope. Will the entrance exam like IIT, GE, NEET, CLAT, etc. go with NT coming in? They're all scrapped. All of them are scrapped. What will happen is that you'll have the NTA set up similar examinations for each subject. So you'll still have these. They'll be called different names, but there won't be a once a year lottery type thing. You'll be able to take them multiple times, 2 years, 3 years. And if you look at international entrance exams, and particularly in the US, I think that's what they're looking at, whether it's the LSAT, SAT, GMAT, they can be taken multiple times, every couple of months even, or even monthly in some cases. And that I think is a very reasonable thing to do. I think for those who are in the test prep industry and are worried, don't be worried. Yes, there will be a reset switch because all your brand created around the old tests are all gone. All your IP created around those old tests are all gone. But there's the opportunity now for these new tests to come in, and there'll be a huge market share grab to see who can specialize in these and really figure out and offer them. So I think that's very important. Policy does not talk about education entrepreneurship as a for-profit enterprise. I think that'll happen investment by private players. Well, to be honest, I think the policy is winking at you. At least that's what I got after reading the 350 draft, the 75 and 65. I think they needed to pay lip service to a lot of the communist left-wing people, command and control guys who have this notion of somehow government paying for everything and private people not paying for. I never got it, and it doesn't work. And around the world doesn't work. And in India, we just don't have the money. You know, when your entire budget is your higher education budget of your central government is equivalent to one university, private university in the US, you need to relook at what we're trying to do. And India, particularly in vocation education, has a history of for-profit players delivering 10x, 100x, 1000x results, not even 5-10x results over government and philanthropic activities. I think they have mentioned in the policy several times Section 8 companies. So there will be regulatory around that. I had hoped they would have put something for for-profit education, but you have to see the policy in context, right? You have a Section 8 company, which is mentioned there, and you have in the last budget and the budget before a social entrepreneurship stock exchange, which was going to come. And I see those as absolutely linked, that you're going to have a stock exchange for Section 8 companies separately. And that's how they're going to get around the for-profit systems, by building a separate capital structure and a separate system of governance for that. I still think there's enough ways to structure it. So I don't think I think this will allow huge amount of private money to come into education, a massive amount, because it cleans up all the bad practices. A lot of the top players and funding guys didn't want to come in because there was just so much bribery, extortion done by local regulatory authorities, governments, state governments. It was impossible to clean the system. And with a cleaner cut system, with a predictable model, with a focus on quality and accountability, good private players can finally enter. And existing private players can raise huge amount of funding, both for profit and non-profit. And there are ways to do that. I firmly believe that's possible. How will the existing teachers already in the workplace get trained in this policy? This is why I wanted to do something like this webinar. It is a massive change, and so you're going to first, after the policy, you're going to have the laws, and the laws are going to be first at the central level, and some of these laws are going to require a constitutional amendment. One thought is the reason why the government waited this long is because they realized they needed control of both houses to actually pass through the education policies, because some of these may require a constitutional amendment because of the concurrency of education as a state and local subject. But even if they're able to go around that, and there are ways that they can go around it by modifying existing acts, scrapping other things, building up certain things which are in their control, states have to then pass their own laws or scrap their own laws to match the new policies. I think BJP ruled states will start first. I think other states will take their own time. I think a lot of them are going to protest because, again, they're losing their corrupt money, they're losing their corrupt control, and they don't like that. But about a year and a half before the dust clears on that, teachers particularly are going to go through a massive transformation. I think huge number of vacancies will open, and the new teacher training modules will come up. Teacher eligibility tests will come up. All of that will come out. All of that is going to be a one-year transition period. And then you're just going to have a huge number of teachers leave the system and huge number of teachers enter the system. And it's going to be a massive disruption for the next 3 to 5 years. And that's what happens when you wait 30, 40 years to change your education policies versus doing it incrementally towards a vision. But I think it's a good thing, better to rip out the Band-Aid now and do it once than, every year do one little, and then you never get anywhere. Homeschooling on up to 3 years by parents for preschools, 3 to 6 as per NEP. So they've given NCRT guidelines and they've given a bridge course to class 1. So I think so homeschooling will happen, and by de facto does happen apart from the urban areas. Again, over-regulation by the government. But rural areas, what are you going to do if there's no early child education? They have that 3-month bridge program. I think that's going to be formalized. Capacity building is going to take years. But let's say, I think there's going to be very few people who are going to argue against a well thought out homeschooling policy. And we've reached that, and NIOS is there, ODL is there, all of that is coming in. I think homeschooling is going to take off in India. It should take off in India, particularly as parents are a lot more confident in the digital system. You said ratio 31 will 30:1 will maintain. There are few schools which have already 7 to 8, 10 sections, 45 students each. Yes. So part of the reason why in Delhi and other states is because of the disastrous land management policies. Ideally, you should have an FAR of 4 for schools and allow much larger classrooms to be built, and allow a different model of funding. Otherwise, everything is going around in circle, right? One thing hits another, and I think this is something which is very important. The 30:1, 25:1 is going to be first pushed towards government schools, which are going to take a long time to do it, and then eventually private schools. But if you move to a 30:1 ratio, private school fees have to be increased because they won't be able to sustain. In fact, that's something that the policy is very lightly talked about now, but talked about in great detail in the previous drafts. Who's going to pay for all of this, right? And I think that's where a lot of states who have been very bad at encouraging innovation using fees as a political weapon rather than as a way to increase or support parents and the greater education sector, those states are going to be painful. And I think and hopefully with the new laws and the new amendments that will come in, people will find that. But quite frankly, the way that the policy envisioned, which is the right thing to do, is that your government schools will be so good that people don't want to go to private schools. Fantastic. I think that is the way to do it. And I think private schools have been and should be a luxury. They should be for specific communities or specific needs or specific value systems. And only those parents should go to those schools who believe in those value systems, who believe that the school is offering something which is special, and then be willing to pay for it. In places like states like Delhi, particularly, private schools for years have been basically operating, filling in the gap that the government has not been able to step up on. And I think in states like Delhi, I think the government should take the view that private schools should be completely thrown out of their regulatory domain, which is what the Act says. Let them do whatever private schools want to do. The focus of the government should be on empowering government schools and ensuring that no single parent has to send their child to private school if they don't want to pay those fees. Don't send them to private school if you can't pay the fees. Send them to a fantastic government school where they'll get a brilliant education for their future. And let's see how that ends up, because those will be state level fights. And this, the number of lawsuits that are going to go into the Supreme Court on this is going to be extraordinary. Lots of other questions. Again, people raising their hands. I can't unmute you. Please ask your question in the Q&A. Very, very happy to look at it. Way to do, etc. What is the impact of the concept of length of degree on the coming generation of students? Will it be a more skillful for students or lack of education will not compete students? Sagar, great question. See, the reason why they are doing multiple exit options is because, and I didn't cover the numbers, but the numbers are there. You see a massive drop on students who enter the education system, then they drop and they drop. It's not a curve, it's a cliff. You just see a huge dropout of people. And so what happens when you drop out of the formal education system, the years you spent in it are not recognized. And so this notion of at the higher education level, getting something after the first year, something after the second year, something after the third year, something after the fourth year, really allows you to at least reward the students for the amount of work that they've put in, and starts making people think of education at the margin, which is very important. Right now, people think of education as a lottery. I got into a great college, lottery won. Got into a great school, lottery won. And I finished a 4-year course, lottery won. Finished a PhD, lottery won. Not that every single extra year of effort I put in will be rewarded by some recognition. And I think that is very important, but it's also important from a hiring perspective. If you look at all the CVs and the job description, you see must be a graduate. Why? A lot of jobs don't need you to be a graduate. Must be a diploma holder means at least 2 years of higher education you have. Must be a certificate holder, at least gives you 1 year of higher education, which is needed. So it's good for colleges and schools because it allows you to have multiple exit paths, but it's also good for students. And the academic credit bank supports that, because let's say you spend 2 years, got your diploma, your credits are sitting in that bank. You add 2 years at any point in the future and you get your degree. So it allows a greater level of control, particularly for students who have no choice. Life happens. Parents get sick. You have to go work somewhere. You get hospitalized. You have to go you become the only economic earner of your family. These disrupt massively what happens to students. At the Apeejay at the university, we have the internal credit bank that you can stop out and start again. What they've taken that concept and they've turned it into a national credit bank, which I think is absolutely amazing. Is the Indian NEP as good as the German vocational education training system? Well, I used to run one of the training centers for cars actually back in 2002. So it's different. It's not better or then. The NEP is not so much in terms of focused as much on vocational education as much as it's focused on an end-to-end transformation of the Indian sector. And I won't go into that, but partly what we've seen is the biggest issues what we've looked at beyond the urban talks about Delhi and Delhi schools and Bombay schools and all of that is that you have a great dropout rate of students um, through schooling, not enough vocational exposure, and those who drop out don't end up taking up vocational subjects because they see it as demeaning, or they just don't know where to start. I think what the NEP does is it starts blending vocational into mainstream formal education really well. I think they've laid the framework for something like the German vocational education system, but that has to be then seen in next steps. They haven't explicitly talked about it, but it's something that is very much on the cards. And what they've done very nicely for vocational, and if you had read that part, they're linking vocational training to the International Labor Organization codes and certifications, and creating a vocation, what I would say is basically a vocational credit bank as well. And I think that also will really help. And then starting bringing in companies into this ODLs and credit bank systems would become closer and closer. I think the German vocational education model needs reform as well. It's not the greatest on earth, but I think there is a lot of room, and I think the foundation is there. Again, my worry is what happens when they turn it into law. What new jobs will be created if you want to educate our children about them? Well, so, I'll talk about specifically the jobs that the education policy makes. I'm not going to talk about all the jobs which will come with Industry 4.0 and India transformation and post-COVID-19 stuff, right? You're going to have a lot of Sanskrit teachers. So if you want a guaranteed government job, learn Sanskrit, become a Sanskrit teacher. That's a great way to get a very stable government job. But more seriously, you're going to see a rapid progression where local schools and clusters are going to start to absorb a lot of expertise, and it's going to provide huge employment opportunities, particularly around the multidisciplinary sectors, whether it's arts, psychology, philosophy. India had a huge shortage of these skills already. Forget about in the academic sector, but I think it's going to create a phenomenal number of jobs. I think the digital part and the digital education part is going to become a huge thing, not in the edtech way people are seeing. I don't think there's enough money there in India for that yet. And that's the reason why all the latest deals are happening in the US and not in country. But there's a huge opportunity during this transformation for technology to act as an administrative assistant, because a lot of what the policy is trying to do is very hard to do if you don't have a very good technology backbone and framework. And I think there are going to be a huge number of jobs created in building that out and managing it. But critically, number of professors, number of teachers have to go up 4x, 5x time. And so if your kids are very interested in the teaching as a serious profession, this is a great time. An absolutely great time to come in. I am worried that many politicians in oppositions will make sure that this will not go through. Well, yes, there's a lot of opposition to it. A lot of academics are losing their hair because for the first time, they're going to have to completely transform themselves. They're already reeling from the shock of COVID, and now suddenly they have to become multidisciplinary. Suddenly they have to change. They are going to invent all sorts of excuses not to do it, and they're going to do a lot of pushback. It's a reason why that 350 went to 74 and to 65. Once the laws come out, it's going to even go slower. So I estimate maybe 30-40% of the actual content will be implemented. I think 60-70% will be just left on paper. If you look at the UGC 1965 documents, most of the UGC stuff was left on paper for 2-3 decades. They never implemented. Only last 5-10 years, they started implementing some of those amazing policies in a serious fashion. So I expect about 30% to survive, maximum 40%. And I just hope enough good things survive that it maintains its absolutely revolutionary stance. I think on the school education side, a lot more will survive because most people are aligned there. Most people are very well aligned there. Other stuff. If a teacher getting a job in a government school is not becoming possible, if you're good people with finance and connections only get jobs in government colleges, true. Moreover, innovation such courses are not offered by government schools. we are forced to go to the private sector only. I think that's what this policy is really trying to address. If you really look at it, private sector isn't really talked about much. It's only talked about as a reference point to the government sector. Because the policy realizes the transformation is not required in the private sector as much as it requires in the government sector. I think having that teacher qualification test, closing down of these 10,000 degree mills or transforming them, having a national appraisal system for teachers, which is transparent and upfront, all of these things will encourage good teachers to enter the profession. It will encourage people to even pay them well, because right now a lot of really bad teachers in the system make it hard for everybody else. There's no transparency. There's no standardized system. Teacher transfers take place on government connections and on paying of money all the time. And I think that once that has stopped, I think there'll be a space for the professionalization of this entire system. What shape will the private coaching industry take place once implementation of the policies on the way? I think the private coaching industry was murdered by COVID-19 already, right? So you had massive number of franchisees that were killed off. I think a lot of these centers had to close. Some of them made the transition to digital immediately, and they're the ones who are still doing a little bit well. But essentially, all intellectual property created around being great at IIT, GE, or this and that is all gone out the window, right? So those who have established trust with students on service is the ones who are going to stay. And I think in 2 years' time, which is the session of reset, you're going to have a massive one-time disruption that you're going to have to at one point. How do you hire somebody to even teach a test that doesn't exist yet, right? How do you create course materials around it? How do you create hacking modules that, we'll figure out how to get massive marks on this test? And I think that's going to be a 1 year of blood, sweat, and tears for the entire community as they really figure out. I don't think coaching centers are going away. I don't think, I wish they were, and I've been advocating that for years, but I have seen it now in person internally that coaching centers are a vibrant and essential part of the education community because it's culturally ingrained in India. The only thing is that is the test they're coaching for good or bad? And I would argue most of the tests they're coaching for are bad. So it's not a coaching industry problem, it's a test that is wrong. And I think you'll have the NTA, they'll come out with 5-6 different tests for each different subject, and you'll have coaching centers around this. I don't see that going away. Private tuition centers to make up for poorly run schools are also going to continue. Yes, the board exam pressure will get off, but that won't stop people from trying to get great marks. And that's not going to happen. So I think it's of a transformation. In fact, I think it's going to get boosted just because so many changes will happen and the schools and the school teachers won't be able to adjust fast enough. You'll need third parties to really step into support this. Okay, just taking last couple of questions. PM Modi is addressing any PM or anything you can be expected from his address. Well, I have learned the Prime Minister is amazing. And he always leaves all of us guessing. So I won't like to venture a guess on what the Prime Minister would say, but I would hope. He's already given a few addresses on NEP, and I think I hope it's him starting the political conversation to get the laws passed, and I hope he gives us timelines that by this session we'll pass it, by this session we'll pass that. This is as impactful or more impactful than demonetization, quite frankly. I don't think the media, I don't think parents, I don't think students, I don't think educators really grasp the massive amount of changes that have happened. I have no clue why no one reads the actual policy, but this is not passed by a cabinet, so it's not a draft. And I hope that the Prime Minister sort of gets through to all educators and admits you need to take this seriously. It's not a vision 2030, vision 2040 plan and sochenge karenge buzzword tambola, but fundamental changes on the ground. And I think a lot of people are going to be very upset because their extortion and bad actor livelihoods will be taken off, and they're going to invent all sorts of nonsensical complaints about it. And so I'm just happy they passed it through cabinet. But again, what happens in the laws that we will have to see. Those I'm a little bit less clear on, because once the IAS goes through it, they will have to put their own legislative opinion, and that may the good preamble might not reflect in the actual enablement, let's just say, in the policies. Take one more questions. Lots of them, lots of them, lots of them. Can we have another workshop? I went over really fast. My apologies. I did a practice round and I seem to have covered the entire thing in 45 minutes. I think I just realized that I was reading through, there's a lot of context. And as people were asking questions, I thought, okay, maybe let me elaborate on this. Happy to do another workshop and maybe do a deep dive. And after Modi ji speaks, I'll tell you what, we'll do another workshop, and we'll do it when the law is passed, and we'll do it school education separately and higher education separately and vocational separately, and we'll take a look at the laws and how they have changed, because it's 65 pages of policies. Everybody, if you get time, read it, but I think the real point where you'll have to do the transformation is when the law will come in, and that is a 3 to 6 month waiting period. And I think there I would read that line by line, because as you've seen in this policy, they are changing everything. And if they're changing everything to that degree, you really, really need to make sure that you are able to, keep up with it. Because everybody in the education sector, the way they used to work 2 weeks ago has completely gone. COVID sent it out the window, and then this thing has sent it off the planet. So, so we all need to get together and really see how we can truly, truly push this through. I've been told I'm out of time. My apologies. Thank you very much. I'll try to get the recording of this up and running quicker. I know at CII we have been behind in getting all the recordings up. I am going to post a list of all the CII of the CII available webinars. We have a Telegram channel. The recording links to this will be posted there. So please sign up, as well as future webinars for all CI, not just on education. And my gratitude for all of you for joining me. Wish we had a few more hours. And please have a great evening. And let's look forward to what our Prime Minister has to say about the policy tomorrow. Thank you.